This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Today's ChangeMaker is Marcia Lewis. Marcia is an affordable housing veteran extraordinaire with over 27 years of experience. She's currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Memphis Housing Authority. Before running the MHA, she directed the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development's office in Memphis, where she was responsible for the oversight of over 40 public housing authorities. Marcia, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start in about May of 2019. You were appointed by Secretary Ben Carson to be a member of the Housing Counseling Federal Advisory Committee, and you also serve on several boards, including the Tennessee Association of Housing Redevelopment Agencies, United Housing in Memphis, the Southeast Affordable Housing Management Association, and you formerly served on the Federal Home Loan Bank. Where did you know that you wanted to start working in affordable housing, or how did you always know this was your passion?
A lot of things happen through unusual situations in life. And when I was finishing a degree area in education as a very young person, they did a huge layoff of teachers in the state that I lived in. And I realized I was not going to be able to teach unless I left the area. And I was very young and had never left home. So I decided to seek a different major. And I ended up settling on urban studies and found out that I loved the history of housing. I loved the history of understanding how communities and cities came to be. It was through that work that I became aware of people in the industry. I became aware of Patricia Harris. I became aware of Barbara Jordan. I became aware of people who had worked to advocate for people on their behalf, and particularly for low-income people as it related to housing. So I still took a while, but eventually I had an opportunity to work with the Housing Authority, even though I actually worked in another role with the city of Indianapolis. And when I ended up being able to do this work jointly, I realized just how much I loved it and my connection to people who lived in housing, to the work of housing, to understanding the rules, the laws, and it progressed from there. So by a turn of events, I guess.
Maybe it was some kind of affordable housing destiny, right?
Yeah, yes, maybe.
So Quadell and the Memphis Housing Authority, we have worked together for quite some time, and we have actually received HUD's highest performance rating of high performer for about a decade. And this is in much part thanks to people like Shakitha Dowers and Dexter Washington, and many of our staff who are daily doing all the things that matter. But you in particular have a unique management style in the fact that you are one of the few CEOs who know how to do everything from an actual file recertification to very, very complex redevelopment deals. So why have you incorporated this within your expertise and your executive operating approach?
I always believe in being a lifelong learner. I'm very nosy. A lot of people would prefer the word curious. I want to know what's happening. I've always been that way when I've gone to work in places. I've always wanted to know what people were doing in other areas and how they did it. And where I could, I would try to learn the process. For example, I spent several years as a human relations coordinator and an instructor for the Indianapolis Police Department. And I actually went through the entire police academy, even though I never became a police officer. So I would understand the perspective of the police that I was trying to teach in different areas. And I've done that in other jobs. I wanted to know if I am trying to hold people accountable or help people with resources they need or technical advice or technical assistance. It means so much more when they know that you are coming from a position of knowing what you're talking about. It's a little harder to tell people to do things when you haven't touched it. I haven't
Mhm.
lived public housing, but I have tried to understand every faction of it so that when I'm trying to make decisions, they make sense to the people that we're going to affect with with our work.
And this is really part of a secret sauce to your success as a CEO. And how do you get your team then to still be concerned about making sure you hold people accountable, like you mentioned, but then also understanding the process, understanding the resources needed? So, how do you translate that down to your team? Because it's so unique how you manage here. And then to try to expect your team to do the same. Is that hard for you? Does that come natural?
I think everyone starts from a position of what is she talking about and why? And who is she to what I am trying to do or what she's asking me to do? So I think you have to, first of all, you have to build trust. And it's kind of funny to think back over the work that I've done and the people that I've worked with, how maybe in the beginning they were a little leery until they realized that, I was trying to work with them. I was trying to help them with what they needed to do with their jobs instead of dictating and micromanaging. I remember when I worked for the HUD department in Kentucky, I went on a field review. The first thing I did with everyone who reported to me was to go out in the field with them. And some were a little sensitive about it because they thought I was trying to evaluate their work or their capacity. And when they realized that I was trying to get to know the lay of the land, to understand them and their needs and how they worked so that they can understand how I worked, it really went a long way. But in the beginning, everybody has, some
Mhm.
doubt, but normally they reach a point where they understand that I believe in helping people to rise to the occasion. I don't want people to live down to my expectations. I want them to live up to the expectations that are there.
Marcia, you are the first female CEO of the Memphis Housing Authority, and you're also the first female CEO of a housing authority that we've had on this podcast. We previously had Cindy Stotler with the City of Phoenix and their housing program, but this typically has been a male dominated arena, and you are a pioneer in your role. What ways have you had to lean in, like Sheryl Sandberg would say, and be the voice at the table when others at the table don't look like you or even manage like you?
That's interesting that you should say that because when I came on board, a lot of my conversations with my senior team was about having a seat at the table. And it was very important to me for people to understand what we brought to the table. And I think that's part of the way in which I work. With rare exception, almost every job I have ever had, someone contacted me about it. There were times when, I might have been interested, but most often people contacted me. And I think it was because people knew that I was going to do the work. They knew that I was going to do what it took to get the job done. And I think that in the beginning, people they don't expect me to, and I'm not, I don't mean for this to sound vain, but they don't expect for me to know what I know. They don't expect the knowledge. They don't expect the experience. And it seems to be like almost a pleasant surprise at times. And then all of a sudden, it's like the world opens up and we want to hear from you more. We want to know this or we want to include you. But it's interesting how people view you and until they know that, not only can you talk the talk, but you can actually walk the walk.
And are there mentoring and wisdom transfers that we as female leaders should be making for the next wave?
I believe that it is everybody's responsibility to bring someone along with them or to lift someone up. For me, it's not always that I've necessarily looked at another woman, at another Black female, and said, I need to specifically do that for them. I've just always felt that way about people in general. When I've seen people who are looking to do something in a field that they're in, and I know that I can help lift them or help teach them or provide, some type of wisdom, if you will, to them, I just think it's my responsibility to do that. I just think it is about sharing. It is never going to kill me to give people information. And some people are very protective of
Mm.
information. The only thing they can control, and they don't, it's almost like job security. I've never had a problem with hoping that the people who work for me are smarter than me. Ultimately, it's going to make me look good.
So, you know what? I have a trick question here, and it's along that same vein here. If you were on the head transition team for the new secretary, what would you be advocating for in the realm of policy or funding changes?
I would be advocating for people to take a look at the cycles of poverty and the cycles of housing and growth in urban areas. I would advocate to have funding that is comparable or at ratios of communities, not one size fits all. It is not going to benefit small housing authority to not have more technical assistance or to get the same level of funding or be under the same rules. But I really think there has to be some kind of a rational application to the funding that people receive and that agencies and cities receive. HUD sometimes thinks, if we put this out there, I tell people all the time, based on my experience with HUD, HUD likes to issue mandates and it likes to put programs out. And then it likes to write the guidebooks and the manuals on the backs of the people who encounter the barriers and work through these programs that, have no rule or direction. Many times it is discovered that you cannot do this. You can't do this with a big community if it works for a small community or vice versa. I would advocate for someone who is willing to listen, before they come in with agendas that are specific to them or to their thinking at the time they come in, to take a look and assess and really see what makes sense for communities across this country, because it's not one size fits all.
Hmm. And the dynamics of the market trend, whether it's establishing the rents, whether it's leasing, whether it's even paying a housing authorities, not paying you until you get that first person lease, not realizing, it could take them 60, 90 days extensions to even find an available unit. And so some of the assumptions on even how housing authorities are supposed to operate or be funded, there's some flaws in those structures alone too, because clearly you have a lot of expenses way before that person even finds the unit. So lots of pieces in that have changed over the last 30, 40 years on how we even conduct the business of housing.
When you raise that point, what was it? The Brooks Amendment and I think 1974 established that people would pay 30% of their adjusted income. So there's been so much change to our economy, to how people are compensated, to the levels of compensation that people receive. Does it make sense for us to still have the same policies in place that we had in place, a minimum rent or zero rent, a minimum rent of $50, was established in what, 2003, 2000 something, somewhere after Quora, the
Hmm.
Quality Housing and Work Responsibility Act of 1998. I would venture to say that on average, many, many, many people can afford more than a $50 minimum rent at this point. But because we are still being held to outdated rules and regulations on a one size fits all methodology, we're paying more towards rents that have gone up every year with cost of living changes and with the changes in our economy, but we've never raised anything on the other end. So someone needs to look at those things.
Mm-hmm. I want to hear more about the amazing work you're doing in Memphis, but we've got to stop right here. Coming up in the second part of my conversation with ChangeMaker Marcia Lewis, the Chief Executive Officer of the Memphis Housing Authority, Marcia talks about what she's doing with the nearly $30 million HUD Choice Neighborhoods grant that she received.
It has just been an amazing thing, and to see the landscape change in the way that it is, to see how it has, I think more than anything, how it has stimulated a true revitalization.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.